Today I want to tell you the story of 100,000 people who vanished without a trace. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of information to who these people are, and then we'll dive into the mystery of it all. So back in the 10th century in Tibet, there is a kingdom called the Kingdom of Tubo, and their leader, Lang Dharma, gets assassinated. Through the chaos that ensued, Lang's grandson would lead his supporters off to an isolated area in the southwest corner of Tibet called Guge, where the grandson and his descendants would eventually set up a kingdom. Now Guge was very remote and existed about 12,000 feet up into the mountains. Despite that though, it was established as a great political and religious center in the region and absolutely thrived for 700 years, eventually growing to some 100,000 strong as a population. Guge was filled with thousands of temples, palaces, cave systems, and had two capitals, one which was a military fortress that helped Guge repel attacks from neighboring kingdoms, even helped them wait out a Mongol invasion. The kingdom was strong and resilient, cultured and important, filled with people, and then something happened. Sometime around 1630 to 1635, one of Guge's military rivals, the Kingdom of Ladakh, finally overwhelmed them and conquered them. What's messed up is Ladakh was another kingdom that had been created by Lang Dharma's grandson and his further descendants. So it was pretty much like living in a house with your brother and he kicks your ass and takes over your room. Now, the Ladakhis killed everyone living around the main palace and kidnapped the king and his family, taking them away. And so the Ladakhis would rule over the kingdom of Guge and their 100,000 people for about 50 years. But then the central Tibetan government, which was ruled by the 5th Dalai Lama, showed up in military force and kicked the Ladakhi occupiers out. Of course, though, they seized the entire kingdom of Guge for themselves. The Dalai Lama would then send government officials to Guge to rule over the kingdom and its people. But now things are about to get weird. The Guge kingdom was so remote that the central Tibetan government pretty much let it be, just keeping it under the control of government officials and not really involving it in anything else. But in the early 1900s, the government decided, hey, let's start taxing the people of Guge. And the central Tibetan government sent soldiers to the region to collect those taxes. But when the soldiers returned, they were empty-handed. The soldiers reported that the entire kingdom of Guge was deserted. Now, this was a kingdom that had 100,000 people. It stretched from modern-day Tibet all the way into modern-day areas of India and Pakistan. And despite being in the desert, there were a lot of fertile spots of land that helped support such a huge population of people. But as far and long as these soldiers had searched, they had come across no one. So now we get to go over the theories as to how these 100,000 people just simply disappeared. So one theory that was put forth was that when the Ladakhis conquered Guge, they were so brutal that they massacred most of the 100,000 people and chased off the rest. But there was no mention of this from the central Tibetan government when they took over the area. And remember, they sent officials to rule over the area, and a couple hundred years later expected so many people to still be living in Guge that it was worth sending soldiers down there to collect taxes. Also, there is a lack of physical evidence, as no mass graves have been found and only a small amount of human remains in general were ever found. Another theory, though, is that the inhabitants of the kingdom just up and left and joined in neighboring kingdoms. Maybe because of some kind of drought or economic hardship that hit the area. But one would expect there to be some kind of record of this migration from the neighboring kingdoms. I mean, 100,000 people are coming in your kingdom. Even if they split up between a few different kingdoms, it's like tens of thousands of people are just coming in an influx in your kingdom. That would be recorded. That would be a big thing to happen, but there doesn't seem to be any written record, at least. There are some people living in the area today who have oral traditions and family stories about their ancestors who lived in the kingdom of Guge, so that is worth noting, but it's very, very little to go on. Now we get into more of the fringe theories that might be a little less likely, but I find to be fascinatingly fun to think about. One of these theories is that the local gods of the area laid waste to the land. The people of Guge, though, were primarily Buddhist, though a few other religions were practiced by some people in the area. This theory would be pretty hard to prove, so would the theory of a massive abduction by visitors from space. But while I wouldn't die on that hill, I could give that theory a little more plausibility than the last, with all of the information we're now learning about the size of space and the possibility that the crafts in the sky being spotted and recorded might not be of earthly origins. But a million questions would still be remaining, including who, where from, and why. One of the most intriguing theories to me, though, although it leans more into fringe territory, is the idea that the people of Guge moved inside of the nearby mountains. I think this theory is at least fun to think about. There has apparently been nearly 1,000 caves and cave systems in and around the mountains there that have been discovered. Some of these cave systems are miles deep. We also have the local legend of the city of Shambhala, a city that is said to exist deep inside of the mountains. Add that information to underground cities that we have unearthed, like Kuyu, and other tales of cities said to be inside of mountains like the tales surrounding Mount Shasta, and you have at the very least a very fun theory to think about. The thing is, though, both the practical theories and the fringe theories just don't have enough evidence backing them up, and so we're left to wonder how 100,000 people could just disappear like that. So whether practical or far-fetched, share with us your theory to how so many people could vanish without leaving good evidence to where they went.